goddamn area!
You don't hear these men talk about fighting for freedom in Vietnam. You do hear them, for all their courage, talk about the chances of getting out alive.
That same morning, school children played football with a metal casing they'd found in their playground. It was a Viet Cong mine.
We're making steady progress week by week, month by month. We've got a long ways to go, but progress is definitely being made.
Can the government forces ever get the Viet Cong out of the town now that they're here?
Without question, the war is not stalemated. We're making steady progress week by week, month by month. Needless to say, we've got a long ways to go, but progress is definitely being made.
Do you see Vietnam as a bottomless pit for American troops?
I think additional forces are desired. However, I don't consider it a bottomless pit by any means.
You've been here nearly 4 years now. How have your ideas of the war changed? There have been many optimistic statements, and it looks like a long, hard pull now. How have your ideas of the war changed?
Well, this is a very complex subject to discuss in a few small words. Needless to say, I've learned a great deal in the almost 4 years that I've been here. At least it'll be 4 years in January next. The nature of guerrilla warfare, the tactics and techniques of the communist war of national liberation, all of which has been directed from Hanoi, have taught us many lessons. The situation, I would say, is more complex than I thought was the case 4 years ago. But I must say, during the last 3.5 years that I've been here, we've had some very low points, and I think the lowest point was in the spring of 1965, at which time our president made the very courageous decision to commit American forces. Since that time, things have been looking up. And they're looking up more and more every day.
Do you think the war can be won and not just not lost?
Well, of course, our strategy in the South is a defensive one, because it is our national policy not to enlarge the war. So we are necessarily on the strategic defensive in the South. Now, fortunately, we do have an offensive strategy, and that is an air strategy to the north. Now, the enemy, on the other hand, has an offensive ground strategy. He is moving troops, materiel, ammunition and quantity to the south in order to exercise his control over the people and hopefully dominate the South Vietnamese and subvert the government to the form that is desired by Hanoi. Now, our offensive strategy, however, has forced them to an air defensive in the south. And this has resulted in the necessity by the enemy of diverting large resources and men and materials to provide a defense against our air efforts and to maintain his lines of communication, which are being pounded by our air efforts.
Can you state how long the whole thing's going to be now? Do you think it's going to be very long?
It's
5,
impossible.
10, 20 years?
Completely impossible to predict how long it will last. I feel it will go on perhaps for some time. At least we must be prepared, physically and psychologically for that.
Do you think that without more troops the war can be won?
I think there are sufficient men in Vietnam now not to lose the war. But if we could reinforce our present forces, I think we would accelerate our progress.
Con Thien is the closest American position to North Vietnam. It's an isolated outpost, surrounded by territory favorable to the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong guerrillas. A small hill, searingly hot, chokingly dusty, which commands the surrounding countryside and overlooks the so-called demilitarized zone, or DMZ, which divides North from South Vietnam. The view from Con Thien of the demilitarized zone, but as any Marine or pilot will tell you, it's not demilitarized anymore these days. For up here, a different sort of war is being waged from that in the rest of South Vietnam. Down in the south, it's a guerrilla war, a war of hit-and-run tactics and small operations. Up here, two regular armies are facing each other. America's crack troops, 70,000 US Marines, are strung along the border of the DMZ, facing the North Vietnamese army, whose supply lines are short up here and whose equipment is good. The Americans along the demilitarized zone are dangerously thin on the ground, as I found out when I went out on a Marine operation into the DMZ. It was only the second time the Americans had ventured into what was formerly no man's land. I traveled on a supply convoy to one of the Marine units operating inside the zone. The North Vietnamese have been using the DMZ to infiltrate troops into the south and also to harass American positions with artillery fire. The aim of the Marine operation was, according to one general, to show that the southern half of the DMZ is ours to go in any way we want, at any time. Another officer described the operation as a quiet stroll into the DMZ. They were soon proved wrong. The Marine battalion in the zone was savagely ambushed by the North Vietnamese regulars, and our supply convoy soon became a relief column. Reinforcements were sent to the area to try to relieve the ambushed battalion. The North Vietnamese, who know the area inside out, had let the Marines walk in the zone a whole day without engaging them, and had, as always, picked their own time and place to hit them. Our relief column could hear the battle raging, but couldn't advance, since the North Vietnamese had cut the road. Outmaneuvered on the ground, the Marines had to call for airstrikes to avoid being wiped out. While officials back in Saigon were playing down the battle, a few of the ambushed managed to break out. In a column of tanks, piled with the pathetic debris of the dead and wounded Marines. Some of the wounded who had got out were evacuated by helicopter in the rear. But some in the ambush couldn't be got out and died from their wounds. This was not the quiet stroll into the DMZ that had been forecast. In case a do-or-die relief effort was necessary, more Marines were brought up as dusk fell. You don't hear these men talk about fighting for freedom in Vietnam. You do hear them, for all their courage, talk about the chances of getting out alive after 13 months of this kind of war. This night, though, they didn't have to tempt fate. After the punishing airstrikes of the day came the artillery barrage of the night. The North Vietnamese, constantly pounded, retreated into the scrub and woods to fight another day, at another time and place of their own choosing. Next morning, the ambush battalion came out of the demilitarized zone back to South Vietnam. In Saigon, the figures were being arranged in the best light possible. They said enemy dead were 55 confirmed, but they could be higher. The Marines' casualty toll, at least 35 dead, 178 wounded. Their quiet stroll in the DMZ was over. Voting is the right of the whole people, proclaims the election poster under the shadow of the military memorial in the center of Saigon. And the shadow of the military looms large over South Vietnam's election. There has been no elected government since the fall of the dictator Diem in 1963. For the past 2 years, the generals have governed the country. Now, under American pressure, they've agreed to elections for a president and a 60-man Senate. But in Saigon, you find little enthusiasm for the contest. Few think it will bring victory or peace any closer. The war-weary capital long since gave up politics for more profitable pleasures. There are no parties in Vietnam, but there are 11 candidates for the presidency, each with a symbol so that voters who can't read can identify them easily. The only nationwide organization is the army, and this makes the military ticket of Generals Thieu and Khe the hot favorite to win the election. General Thieu, the present head of state, is the army's candidate for president. He won their vote over the younger, more flamboyant General Khe, the present prime minister. For 2 years, the man at the Vietnam controls has been the 36-year-old Air Force pilot Nguyen Van Thieu. In his habitual black flying suit and lilac scarf, he's hogged the headlines, but for many Vietnamese he's too flashy, too westernized, too young. Under pressure from the generals, he's had to step down in this election to run in the vice president's slot. But no one expects he'll be prepared to stay number 2 after the election. Khe and Thieu have hardly bothered to campaign with the other presidential candidates. Claiming that they were too busy governing the country, they've simply used their official trips, like this one of Khe's, to open a new union headquarters, to campaign on the side. Khe's civilian opponents have charged that the army are being used to rig the election for the generals. They allege that local military governors and police have been intimidating opposition party workers. Khe's answer is that orders have been given to keep the elections honest, and that anyway, he doesn't need to rig the election, since the military will win. After the campaign was a few days old, many Americans began to criticize Khe and Thieu's conduct of the election, many of them in the naive belief that it would be just like one in America. After the union meeting, on his campaign plane, Khe answered the American criticisms.
Back in the state, some senators, congressmen, they cannot imagine or they cannot accept the idea that the military in this country love freedom more than they love freedom in their country. They cannot understand it.
But a lot of your opponents can't understand it either, because they've been accusing the military of rigging the election, of intimidating electors through their people in the provinces. Do you think this is a fair charge?
What province? Where? Who? All these charges are not true. Even 1% are true. Why I have to give order to the police to put pressure on the people? Why?
Do you think you'll win anyway, Prime Minister?
Yes, sir.
While Khe was all confidence, his civilian opponents, who have complained that the government is hampering their electioneering, were faced with a pitifully small crowd at Nha Trang, 200 miles northeast of Saigon. Mr. Zhu, why is this crowd so small for the opposition candidates?
Thank you very much for your question. It is our question too when we arrive here, because with a province with a population of 300,000 and with a big city like Nha Trang with a population of at least 60,000 population, a crowd of 500 people is ridiculous.
Is this government sabotage?
Sure, it is government sabotage, and I can denounce before the international opinion the determination of Mr. Thieu and Mr. Khe to sabotage this campaign.
And do you believe then the campaign is already turned into farce because of this sabotage?
Now we continue to campaign, but we continue to denounce about their maneuver.
And if they win, will you say it's a fix?
They try to win, and I will hand a press conference to denounce all of their maneuver, because we have now evidence about their instruction to the civil servant, to the policeman, and cut of railroad development. Thank you. I have to go now.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you.
The whole presidential campaign is strictly arranged by the government. They provide the transport, the posters, the radio time, and provide a timekeeper to make sure that no candidate talks longer than 15 minutes at each meeting. There's little hope for the candidate who tries to squeeze extra time. The civilian candidates opposing the generals are hardly an inspiring bunch. Most are middle-aged, middle-class conservatives. Anyone too radical was eliminated from the race by the government. Some have been in government before, like the chief civilian candidate, Tran Van Hung, who was a short-lived prime minister in 1965. Hung is the only civilian with any great following, but if elected, he would have to work with the generals who hold the real power in South Vietnam. In such circumstances, it's naive to think the country could have a Western-style democratic election. Few people doubt the generals will win the election. The only worry for them, and the Americans, is that the civilians, with their charges of a rigged election, will have discredited the whole exercise, and that when the results finally go up in Saigon on this board, South Vietnam will have a government that has won an election, but is no nearer to winning a war. South Vietnam's Prime Minister, Marshal Khe, lights the torch at the passing out parade of 1,600 pacification workers at their training center at Vung Tau. But the pacification program, the battle to win the peasants to the government, has not burned brightly since the Viet Cong started their terror campaign 8 years ago. This year, the South Vietnamese and Americans have launched a new drive to train more pacification workers and to try to give them some of the idealism and skills of their enemy, the Viet Cong. The prospects for these pacification graduates are hardly inviting. So far this year, the Viet Cong have killed 350 pacification workers, and only half of Vietnam's 14,000 villages are under the control of Marshal Khe's government. There are 6,000 trainees at the Vung Tau training center, and the aim is to get them to beat the Viet Cong at their own game. They're urged to educate the peasants by example, to organize their defense, and to root out corrupt village officials. Too often in the past, pacification workers have been regarded by the villagers as outsiders who would leave when the Viet Cong started trouble. Learn to do things the peasants' way to get their trust. The pacification workers are taught, whether it be agriculture or house building. And like the Viet Cong, the pacification workers wear the traditional peasant black pajamas. For many trainees, pacification work is merely a way of dodging military service, and there's an added advantage that they're sent to work near their hometowns. Few are idealists, convinced that they're building fences against communism. 30,000 pacification workers are now in the field in Vietnam. Their target this year is to win back 1,100 villages from the Viet Cong. Some of the villages they're working on now have been supposedly pacified 4 or 5 times before. The Viet Cong have always come back. As one American official remarked, we're trying to carry out a revolution in the countryside, but the real revolutionaries are on the other side. The emphasis of the pacification program now is security. Villagers won't cooperate unless they're defended. In spite of their weapon training, pacification workers often show little taste for fighting the Viet Cong. The desertion rate among their 59-man teams in villages is high. Now, 315,000 Vietnamese troops and American advisors are being called in to help the pacification program. There have been similar, much heralded schemes before: strategic hamlets, rural construction. They all failed. Revolutionary development is the name of the new program. Its driving force is Major Bay, the training center's commandant. He admits the enemy of pacification is not so much the Viet Cong as corrupt South Vietnamese officials.
Very widespread. There are many of them.
We have telling about the corruption now. We can say that most of the officials are corrupt because the economic situation and the lack of responsibility spirit in our country. Most of people don't have any responsibility because I feel that this work is the Americans' war, that is the government war, but not for their
Not their war, not their
Yeah.
problem, you mean?
Not their problem. So now, in our program, we try to make them to participate in our program and to feel that that is their responsibility to solve the problem.
A war-weary people, corrupt officials, a cunning enemy. These are the huge problems that face Vietnam's new pacification workers. No wonder their singing sounds a little forced.
At about 10 o'clock on an unusually peaceful morning in Saigon, the 35th Battalion Vietnamese Rangers, said to be the best troops in the South Vietnamese Army, start cordoning off a square mile of District 5 on the edge of Cholon. Sniper fire can be heard in the area. Frightened residents start moving out and are stopped, searched and questioned, sometimes not too gently. After a bit, the Rangers move up the street into a position on a street corner. The locals say the Viet Cong moved into the area, a maze of narrow streets and alleyways, the night before, and are holed up in a new block of flats. The situation begins to get tense. At about 11 o'clock, the first heavy firing starts. At 11:30, the Rangers are ordered to move back. All they were doing is to risk shooting their own men on the other side of the cordon. Shortly afterwards, reinforcements arrive, including a special heavy weapons unit of American military police, formed because of the present emergency. Some of them have never seen action before. By now, the whole area is cordoned off, and like so many beaters driving grouse to the butts, the Rangers start to sweep down to the blocking force, which includes the Americans. But the sweep seems to peter out, and the Viet Cong refuse to be driven. Instead, in a tactic they've used repeatedly in Saigon in the past fortnight, the Viet Cong start a fire which the wind will soon spread, hoping, presumably, to slip away in the resulting confusion. Half an hour later, the place is like an inferno, and the luckless inhabitants who were crouching on the floor of their houses while the bullets were flying over their heads start to run for safety. On the other side of the street, only too aware of what can happen, householders use every means to counteract the flying sparks. There, all the way down.
And so Saigon burns. Already half the city, a great part of the city has been destroyed just like this by the Viet Cong setting fire to wooden buildings. The fire spreads, the people leave, and in no time at all, that area is charred and ruined and destroyed. I asked an American officer how long he thought it would take to winkle the VC, the Viet Cong, out of areas like this where the houses are crammed close together and where the alleys are very narrow. He said it'll take months if we can ever get them out. And that is the problem in Saigon. Can the government forces ever get the Viet Cong out of the town now that they're here?
Để tên thằng đó không? Trong bể tấm thằng này đâu biết tên về ba thằng không? Cứ nhắc lạ không? nhập lại cái tiền mà thành ra chỗ này khoảng này nhập đâu từ ở đâu đi ở đâu xuất phát còn tôi ở trên kia tôi ở trên Tây Ninh à đưa Tây Ninh lên sao đó kìa không có bị đau ác.
This is a convoy of Vietnamese Marines moving up the Perfume River in the middle of Hue on its way up to try and establish a beachhead on the north of the area which contains the citadel, where 400 or 500 Viet Cong are believed to be still held out, in fact are held out, have been shooting back. It's been heavy mortaring just before the convoy set off. Heavy firing from the convoy as we make our way up the river. This particular LST is carrying a large amount of ammunition on it. We hope we don't get hit in the process. The landing stage on the north side of the Perfume River has become a major bridgehead for the Battle of Hue. The scene begins to resemble Europe in World War II. As in France, Belgium and Germany, this is street fighting in the nasty classical manner. Most of the time, you never see the man who's shooting at you. The United States Marines don't seem to be trained in street fighting. Most of them are green troops. Many have only been in Vietnam for a few weeks or months.
They just had some real situations for the line.
Hey, Manus, what do they got to do? Put out a sign? What do they got to do? Put out a sign? Get down.
They are courageous, but they lack cunning. And because they lack cunning, and street fighting is what it is, they're taking heavy casualties in Hue. Bravo Company, which started off with more than 130 men, is now down to 90. They have only one officer, one master sergeant, and one sergeant left.
Who was it? Was you the one hitting the arm? Yeah. How about you get hit?
Ahead, a gateway, shattered, leads to the Imperial Palace, once as peaceful as Windsor. The Marines complain that they're taking heavy casualties because they're not blasting the old city indiscriminately. They could completely flatten the citadel, where about 700 North Vietnamese army troops are said to have their headquarters. So far, they've held back in order to spare what is culturally the most important city in Vietnam. The Allies face the same problem at Monte Cassino. How long will the Vietnamese and the Americans hold off here, with casualties steadily mounting? And as the Marines slowly force their way forward, house by house, they've been averaging 1 block a day so far, the refugees come creeping out, still trembling. In the street, a dead North Vietnamese soldier lies face down. Excited Marines go up to inspect the body and capture the enemy's weapon. The body is moved by pulling it with a wire in case it's booby-trapped. Yesterday, Bravo Company claimed 25 enemy dead. Its own losses were 3 dead and 8 or 9 wounded. The kill ratio, as the Americans say, is heavily in their favor. Yet, the cost, in what many of themselves say is not only a bloody but a futile war, is mounting all the time. There's no joy in Hue for Bravo Company, nor anyone else, for that matter. Camp Carroll stands almost exactly midway between the sea and the Laos border, 7 or 8 miles south of the demilitarized zone. From this commanding central position, known as Artillery Hill, the American Army's 175s, which have a range of 20 miles, can pick off any target in the whole DMZ area, as well as shooting deep into North Vietnam. But the main mission of the 16 175s is to lay down a protective screen of fire around Khe Sanh, where the Americans have been expecting a major attack for weeks now. In the past 15 months, these super long toms, the longest range guns in the American arsenal, have fired 150,000 rounds, most of them into the hills round Khe Sanh. Soon after we reached Camp Carroll, North Vietnamese troops launched a daytime assault on the Khe Sanh perimeter. Within minutes, the 175s were in action. The barrels of the 175s have to be changed after firing 300 rounds. Each barrel costs $14,000, or the price of a new Ferrari, as one lieutenant said. The big guns are controlled from a nearby underground bunker, the FDC Fire Direction Center. 2 computers are used, one in the battalion FDC, another in the battery FDC, to avoid mistakes in hitting the target. This is vital when the 175s are firing, as they do, only 400 yards at times from the American positions round Khe Sanh. Immediately after the 175s had fired, Camp Carroll itself came under rocket and artillery fire from North Vietnamese positions. About 60 rounds landed in the camp, wounding 12 men. The target, of course, were the 175s. Colonel William Dick commands the 4,000 Marines based on Camp Carroll. One of their main jobs is to defend the 175s. It's been said that if there was to be an attack on Khe Sanh and the enemy was going to try, the North Vietnamese was going to try and overrun Khe Sanh, that first of all they'd have to knock out Camp Carroll because this is the artillery screen for the whole area. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think I can safely say that it would be a distinct advantage for them to knock it out if they were trying to go into Khe Sanh, particularly during bad weather. During good weather, we could rely to a considerable extent on our air. But during weather which would preclude air, like this, to a degree, there might be some air used, but in the event that there was no or limited air used, we would have to rely almost altogether on that particular.
The Americans at Camp Carroll are wondering just how bad the nights are going to be up here near the DMZ. But they're not going to sit here indefinitely and take whatever the North Vietnamese can throw at them. When the weather clears, Colonel Dick says, the Marines will move out and will go on the offensive. That could change the situation. But until then, the guns will stay trained on Khe Sanh.
Now that the Viet Cong are switching their main attacks from the country to the towns and the cities, the Allies, particularly the Americans, are becoming desperately frustrated at their failure to identify the unknown enemy within. Their failure to be able to tell which people in the towns and the cities are South Vietnamese and which are the Viet Cong. And nowadays you increasingly hear them asking, need we have got ourselves into this impossible position? Well, if you look to a relevant parallel with Vietnam, the answer seems to be no. In the first 3 years of the British campaign in Malaya, British intelligence not only identified, but card-indexed 80% of the communists and their collaborators. In Vietnam, there are many well-qualified observers who feel that the Allies are going to pay very dearly for failing to do this here by not being able to regain the initiative they lost when the Viet Cong launched their Tet Offensive.
The only bridge across the Perfume River from the south bank of Hue to the north bank is by way of these flimsy pontoons. In the past few days, thousands of refugees have flocked across it, escaping from the furious battle which has turned the ancient imperial capital of Vietnam into the shattered shell of a once proud and graceful city. The city, its inner citadel, and its university are at the heart of the Vietnamese tradition, and they harbor strongly nationalist feelings. Because of this, Hue was the ideal place for the communists to make what was in essence a political move when, at the end of January, 2 regular units of North Vietnamese infantry infiltrated the city and captured the citadel. How much support they received from the population is impossible to estimate. The price of that support has been the almost total destruction of the city and the deaths of nearly 4,000 civilians.
Here at the Imperial Palace, the lily ponds are full of debris, the trees have been smashed, the gardens full of shell holes, and the courtyard here, a litter of mortar fragments, stones, bricks, all thrown all over the place. But the palace could be in worse shape. It could have been more heavily damaged, and one of the reasons for this is that the Americans and the South Vietnamese deliberately restrained from throwing everything at it as they could have done, but at a price. The cost of the Americans, 119 dead and nearly 1,000 wounded. The cost of the South Vietnamese, about 400, over 400 killed and something like 2,000 wounded.
The palace survived, but many humbler houses didn't. Without a roof to keep off the rain, hundreds of homeless continue to cross the Perfume River in search of refuge on the south bank. It is the last journey for some. For others, like this woman, wounded and perhaps the only survivor of her family, life itself must seem to have come to an end.
When the French were here, they used to call the road that runs from Hue northwards towards Hanoi the street without joy. Well, the city of Hue itself has now become a city without joy.
We're now about 3 miles from the northern perimeter of Tan Son Nhut Airport, General Westmoreland's headquarters. We're with the 6th Battalion of the Vietnamese Airborne Division, and they've contacted about 2 platoons of Viet Cong, probably North Vietnamese soldiers. Stuck now in a very grim battle for possession of the VC's bunkers about possibly half a mile from where we are now. And we're making about 20 yards progress in an hour. It's that sort of progress. As always in these engagements, the South Vietnamese troops are heavily outgunned. On the ground, the enemy's firepower is much the superior. All regular North Vietnamese troops and Viet Cong guerrilla units now seem to be equipped with brand new Chinese and Russian weapons. The most deadly of them all is their newest rocket-propelled gun, the RPG. Its rocket, the Americans have found to their horror, can cut through 13 inches of steel. In this battle, the enemy are using the RPGs as anti-personnel weapons. The enemy is not always in front. In this bunker, there might be Viet Cong hiding. For 10 hours, the battalion's American advisor captain has been requesting a napalm strike. His request is turned down again. He gets gunships. On each run-in, they meet very heavy ground fire from the positions they're attacking. Most of the gunship pilots are 19 and 20. So young, the American advisor remarked, they don't even shave yet. And as everybody here says, these pilots who fly these gunships, these are the real heroes of this war. It's a miracle that not one of them has been shot down so far. Now, this is the first wave of the airstrike. They're using only high explosives. If when the 6th Battalion goes in, root them out, and the Viet Cong are still dug in their trenches, they'll then strike again with napalm. Headquarters still says no to napalm. Instead, Sky Raiders dive down to drop 250-pounders. Now the American advisor captain is angry. For an hour he's been requesting medevac helicopters to take out the wounded. They haven't come. The wounded are dying.
Tell him I got 3 more of my men died. I still can use a medevac though.
What happens next is unusual. The gunship breaks every rule in its ops book and puts down to take out the wounded. The gunships are not equipped to save lives, but this time they will. 9 of the wounded have already died because there were no medevacs available to lift them out. These are the lucky ones. Usually the medevacs arrive before the wounded have been bandaged. The American advisor captain says, it's been a bad day.
Today is a day of national remembrance throughout the whole of South Vietnam to commemorate the thousands of South Vietnamese who were killed in the month-long Tet Offensive launched by the Viet Cong at the end of January. Today, too, President Thieu announced that he was going to try and raise something like £20 million to give aid to the refugees and to repair the damage caused by the offensive. And as part of his new austerity campaign, he announced that all nightclubs would be closed until peace is declared.
I asked President Thieu about the appeal he is launching.
To help Vietnamese people for money and medicine or any construction material, all of that.
How desperately?
Even used clothing for us.
How desperately do you need this?
How what?
How desperately, how badly do you need this?
I believe we need it. We need it about 5, you know, we have now 700,000 refugees, and we need about more than 5 billion of piastres to rebuild the nation.
That's about £20 million. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
But more urgently even than refugee funds, President Thieu needs more soldiers and more weapons. He's known to be anxious to call up another 120,000 Vietnamese, provided he can get enough American aid to equip them. President Thieu is convinced of one thing, that the communists are going to go all out this year, an American presidential election year, to win the war in Vietnam. He and his Vice President, Marshal Key, believe that the enemy will make Saigon, the heart of the body as he calls it, their prime target, although they will probably launch attacks in the DMZ and in the Central Highlands as well. His program from now to May will almost certainly be to try and win more public support than his government at present enjoys, while at the same time pressing the Americans for more troops, more determination, and more guns. 1968, or the Year of the Monkey as it's called here, is going to be a decisive one in the Vietnam War. The outcome, he feels, will shape the future of the whole of Southeast Asia. It will also decide his fate and that of the long-suffering Vietnamese people.
For years now, the Viet Cong have been strong in the Delta. It's where they've always raised taxes, food, and recruits. And recently they've even been enrolling boys of 14 and 15. But the Americans say that since the Tet Offensive, Viet Cong tactics have become much more aggressive. They fire rockets at the river patrol boats with frequency and often deadly accuracy. In one 4-day period last week, 3 of these fiberglass boats were hit and their crews wounded. The Americans thought they'd succeeded in keeping at least the main waterways of the Delta clear of Viet Cong, but now they find that they're not safe even there. They've been attacked several times in the past few weeks by Viet Cong rocket teams operating from the banks of this island in the middle of the main channel. Last Sunday, the river patrol boat headquarters at Can Tho in the Delta decided to launch a retaliatory strike against the island. First of all, the force of fast patrol boats and armored landing craft sailed along the banks of the island, calling on the local population to move out of the area. A psychological warfare team broadcast a message in Vietnamese warning that the strike would begin in half an hour. After the broadcast came the bullets. The bombardment lasted a full hour. One machine gunner was slightly wounded by a bullet splinter. Otherwise, there were no American casualties. But it's doubtful if the Viet Cong had many more. But who will ever know? The Americans will not land on the island. Unless an agent brings in a report, the net result of all that flying lead will remain a question mark. And at least one American officer on the operation thought it was futile.
Oh, yeah. Put a skylight. Everybody. You're on TV, smile. You on Can the Camel, fella. There you go. Yeah, for sure.
I call him.
Yeah, right here, yeah.
Right now they want to come back to their family and get some food.
They want to go to district?
Yes, sir.
Oh, these are refugees.
Yes,
these
sir.
are people that want to go. They heard you talk this morning?
Yes, sir. And
Okay.
they want to come back, their family right now and get some food, rice, and moving back to the district.
Got on 30 India, got on 28, roger. This is 30 India. Roger here.
sporadic shooting going on, but the VC gunmen are on the run. But you'll have seen exactly how the Viet Cong gunmen sometimes work. They'd been in this church for hours watching the American soldiers, and they waited until the civilians came back to the church to collect their belongings. And it was while the civilians came back that the Viet Cong opened fire over their heads at the Americans.
Hey, Pop, what you got here?
This is 328, get the people Okay, just soon I want you. Ngồi đây, ngồi đây. Ngồi đây đâu. Không đi tụi bay, không đi tụi bay. Không có thôi. Về đây rồi. Không đi tụi bay không được à? Đâu đi tụi bay.
Khe Sanh is utterly dependent on the big planes getting through despite weather or ground fire. New radar techniques not only enable the Hercules to drop with almost faultless accuracy, but even if the ground fire hots up, and it almost certainly will, the Air Force claims it will still get the supplies in. And it's been carrying out tests with radar-directed, delayed parachute drops from as high as 10,000 feet. So far, only 3 drops out of more than 100 have fallen into enemy hands, and they were destroyed on the ground by fighters. This compares with the French record at Dien Bien Phu, when 60% of all drops were lost to the communists. This is a load of 105mm howitzer shell fuses for Khe Sanh. They're going to be dropped on the dropping zone just beyond the runway. It measures only about 300 yards by 300, and it's outside the perimeter of the Marine camp. This means that in the event of a full-scale attack by the communists against Khe Sanh, they would probably overrun the dropping zone very quickly. In that case, any further supply drops would have to be made on the camp itself or on the runway. But the United States Air Force insists that it will be able to keep dropping supplies to Khe Sanh quicker than the defenders can pick them up. 2 hours after leaving Bien Hoa, the C-130 begins its final run to the drop zone at Khe Sanh.
Pilot load master, slow down check complete. Pilot load master, 1 minute check complete, the load is hot. Ready.
He was late on that mark.
Okay, get your 20 to the VFR.
I'll give you the VFR one. Ready, mark.
5 seconds. Ready, green light.
The drop was on target, the 4th in a row for this crew. And as the Marines get ready to drag the bundles back to their camp, quite possibly under enemy fire, we turn away steeply to avoid ground fire and head back to base. And so another few tons of ammunition land safely on Khe Sanh. And they need all the ammunition they can get since their ammunition dump was blown up by the communists. They face pretty formidable odds down there. They're almost entirely surrounded. The North Vietnamese have rockets and mortars zeroed right in on the camp. They have trenches dug to within a few hundred yards of the perimeter, and they're even said to have tunnels dug under the camp itself. Also, it's reliably reported that the North Vietnamese have 3 Beagle bombers stationed north of the border, which could attack Khe Sanh with napalm. If the North Vietnamese wanted to take Khe Sanh and make it a second Dien Bien Phu, there are very few Americans here in Vietnam who believe they couldn't do it.
A batch of recruits and draftees arrives at Quang Tri Training Center. Before the Viet Cong's Tet Offensive, the intake at this main training center was 700 a day. Now the number has more than doubled to 1,500 a day. On average, and even allowing for combat losses, you could say that the South Vietnamese army is at present growing by 1 every minute of every day. The build-up is aimed at putting another 125,000 men into the battlefields by June. So it is to be continued at this pace until then. Because of the size and urgency of the call-up, the training period has been cut from 12 to 9 weeks. Even the most optimistic training officers admit this is not long enough. In every army, training is divided into 2 broad categories: what you need to know and what's nice to know. In this army, they have time for only the first. What they need to know most of all is how to kill the enemy. Despite the limitations that time imposes, the South Vietnamese are generally much better trained than the Viet Cong and the NVA. But when the real battles take place, the South Vietnamese are always outgunned. The quality of their weapons is much inferior to the enemy's. There is particularly a desperate shortage of automatic weapons. This is as real as training can be made, and yet it's so inadequate a warning of what they will have to face. For the Viet Cong and the NVA are now using anti-tank and rocket-propelled guns as anti-personnel weapons, and they can slice through 13 inches of steel. One thing that South Vietnamese soldiers have plenty of is food. For some volunteers, it's a good reason for joining up. The motives of some others are more doubtful. Some are already Viet Cong sympathizers and supporters. The army usually only discovers them when it's too late, when they've deserted. In one South Vietnamese unit recently, the desertion rate was as high as 55%. An American advisor at this camp said to me, "We train a lot of them for Hanoi." An airstrike with napalm. The target is an enemy base camp. Close by me, a Negro voice says, "G-man, they're being fried alive." They are a battalion of North Vietnamese regulars. For 3 hours, they've been hit hard from the ground and the air, but still they're fighting. This will be the second time in 3 hours that the Allies have attempted to overrun the NVA positions. The first attempt was beaten back.
That was a napalm strike. There'll be 1 or 2 more in, and then the APCs and the tanks and the infantry are going in. And as far as we know, the BC are still there. They've sat there and taken everything that the planes can throw at them.
For a few seconds before the main assault begins, the battlefield is almost silent. On both sides, many men are afraid. The order is given. The attack is led by the Patton tanks of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. The air is filled with the din of battle. It is to stay like this for 3 more hours. Under the weight of armor and men, the ground is trembling. The NBA bunkers are shielded by trees, so a flamethrower is brought into action to burn them down. Above the battle, in a tiny, flimsy, single-engine plane, the forward air controller is deliberately trying to draw enemy fire. He attracts almost none, so he signals that it's probably safe for the infantry to go in. Almost every one of the first 15 infantrymen to go in is cut down. But now the enemy's fire seems to be coming only from 1 or 2 isolated bunkers. When they are located, the flamethrower is brought into action again. This time, all the trees around the bunkers are burnt to the ground. The Allies find a grisly trophy. On the stretcher is what remains of an NVA soldier's body. It was burned to a cinder by napalm.
Now you can see the strength of the North Vietnamese army. They've taken all that and they're still there, dug in their very deep bunker trenches. And the real job of flushing them out is going to have to be done now by the infantrymen like those in front of us.
To the end, the fighting is bitter. 15 South Vietnamese were killed in this battle. The NBA lost 142. Khe Sanh is still deeply scarred and littered with rubbish, but life on the base has returned to normal. Instead of the noise of incoming rockets and mortars exploding, the tinkle of tin cans and empties as Operation Cleanup begins. For the first time in 77 days, the Marines can stretch their legs and enjoy the fresh air of the camp surface without the fear of being blown to pieces. For 77 days, this was one of the most dangerous areas on the base. For 77 days, every man on the base was convinced he was going to be killed. Now they want only to forget and relax. Perhaps the best evidence of how peaceful Khe Sanh is now is the lack of activity around the medical bay. For 77 days, this was the busiest area on the base. Now the medical staff have almost no work to do at all. The edges of the runway are still lined with the remains of the planes that didn't make it. Some were hit while bringing in supplies. Others were hit while taking out the wounded and the dying. Now, while the planes move freely and safely, the question is being asked, who were the victors at Khe Sanh? The Allies or the North Vietnamese? I asked Colonel David Lyons if he thought the North Vietnamese had never really intended to overrun Khe Sanh and had been bluffing.
Well, you'd have a hard time convincing your Uncle David here that this is true. I took too many rounds to ever feel that this was a bluff. I lost too many men to feel that it was a bluff. There were too many battalion-size attacks to make believe it was a bluff, and I don't know whether Mr. Giap was in charge of it or not.
Yet there wasn't a specific attack, and there's no evidence to suggest that there would have been.
Well, I wouldn't say that either. As I said, I'm not prepared to say you're wrong, but I'm not, in any sense of the word, agreeing that you're right.
Your opinion is that it wasn't a bluff?
My personal opinion is that it was not a bluff.
Whether the North Vietnamese army ever really intended to try and overrun Khe Sanh, or whether their presence in the hills around here was all a big bluff, is raging pretty furiously. But unless the North Vietnamese army commander, General Giap, ever writes his memoirs, it's unlikely that the real story of Khe Sanh will ever be told. My own guess is that the enemy build-up here was all a big bluff, to divert Allied attention during the Tet Offensive and to force the Americans to pull away valuable troops from other more important infiltration lines.
Certainly the North Vietnamese troops surrounding Khe Sanh didn't think it was a bluff. Alan Hart found documents and a letter in a trench on the perimeter which belonged to a North Vietnamese soldier, Son Bang.
The documents we've found don't tell us very much about Son Bang himself, except they indicate that he was very young, probably in his early 20s, and that he wasn't married. The only thing we know for certain is that he was an NVA frontline soldier. He was in this trench here, at least that's where the documents were found. Son Bang's frontline trench here is less than 500 yards from the perimeter of the Khe Sanh base. While the drama of Khe Sanh was being played out, what was in Son Bang's mind? Well, at least we have some idea from the letter he wrote from here in the trench to his home. He never posted it because we found it and we've had it translated. It's what he says. Dear Mother and Father, dear brothers and sisters, I've just come to the place that I'm to do my duty in, and I think I should let you know that I am safe and nothing has happened to me. Dear Mother and Father, how are you? I hope you are well and that my sisters and brothers still go to school. I miss all of you very much. When I've finished my job, I will be back to buy the pen for my little brothers. Mother, how much rice did you harvest last year? Did you all have enough rice to eat? If you receive this letter, please tell all the family I am all right and that I will go on doing my job. One more thing, I'm very happy and honored because I have been made a member of the party. Do not worry about me because no matter where I go or where I live, the government will take care of me. And not just me, the government will take care of 100 million. Last in this letter, I wish you, the whole family, will always be happy and healthy. I will be back home when the communists have liberated South Vietnam. Your son, Son Bang. Compared to the other 500,000 refugees, the Thieu's family is well off. It still has a roof over its head, even if it is a piece of tin and a stretched out parachute. Because this has always been the family home, a very prosperous one until the Viet Cong turned it into a battlefield, the Thieu's prefer to stay and live in the ruins. The Thieu's day begins at 7:30 when they roll up their beds. There are 4 children. The youngest is Trang, she is 1. Tring is 3. Her name means virgin. Trung is the only boy. He's 5. His name means something good. And Truc is 7. For 2 years she's been going to school, but now the military have taken it over, so she has to stay at home too. Mr. Thieu's, the head of the family, is 27. In this tiny space, he has also to accommodate his mother and father. The family's prosperity has disappeared, but even in this comparative squalor, they keep themselves clean and healthy. Tring and Trang seem happy to follow their parents' example. The business of cleaning their teeth at least gives them something to do. For most of the day, they just sit. Apart from the daily chores, there is nothing to relieve their boredom. Though there's hardly meat on the skinny duckling, the Thieu's eat well. Any one of the other 500,000 refugees would perhaps give a lot for just a crumb from this table on the floor. Yet, in a way, the Thieu's are worse off than most of the other refugees, because they have known the good life. They became prosperous, even rich, through their own efforts. Now they have nothing but one good meal a day. Cavalry's advance to the old Special Forces camp was made under the covering support of a heavy artillery barrage of cavalry field guns on nearby hilltops. For a while, some of the supporting shells were exploding only yards in front of the advancing infantrymen.
But supported by very heavy artillery, B Company are now moving in on what's called a probe to the Lang Vei Special Forces camp, which is now believed to be occupied by about a battalion North Vietnamese army. The colonel in charge of the 1st Air Cav has said he doesn't want to lose one man's life on this assault on this hill, so this is only a probe. We have to see what happens.
As usual, what did happen was the unexpected. There was almost no resistance. It was soon apparent that the North Vietnamese Army Battalion, which 3 times before repulsed the cavalry's attempts to retake the hill, had withdrawn during the night to the safety of the frontier mountain of neutralist Laos. The last few enemy defenders were soon outgunned and quickly killed. The occupying North Vietnamese force had made good use of what was left of the Special Forces bunkers, but the rest of the camp had been completely destroyed by Allied bombs, which were dropped nearly every day while the NVA were in residence here. Every bunker and foxhole was thoroughly investigated for booby traps and any NVA soldiers still alive and hiding. The search produced 7 prisoners.
By relieving the pressure around Khe Sanh and by securing all of the hilltops around here, and now by finally retaking the Special Forces camp at Lang Vei, the 1st Air Cavalry have regained the initiative that the Allies began losing on the 7th of February when this camp here was overrun.
From landing zone Snapper, the 1st Air Cavalry's most forward fire and support base, you can look out to Khe Sanh, then sweep right across the enemy's main infiltration route through the valley of Highway 9 to the mountains of Laos, less than 4 miles away. The 1st Air Cavalry succeeded in breaking up the enemy's main force units around Khe Sanh, a job the Marines couldn't do because they are superbly maneuverable. In this rugged terrain, the Allies could not compete in a foot-slogging war with the North Vietnamese without the massive support of a vast fleet of helicopters, which only the 1st Air Cavalry as an individual main force possesses. Within minutes of sighting an enemy force, a cavalry unit can be dropped around it to do battle. And every day too, the field guns are moved to different positions to minimize the enemy's chances of being able to zero in on them and knock them out. Within easy range of the enemy's big guns, a group of cavalrymen take time off to celebrate Mass with a visiting bishop. For a few minutes, the war seems far away. But when they've prayed for peace, they continue with the business of preparing to fight and kill. In the 1st Air Cavalry, the old theory of come easy, go easy really holds good. Because supplies are so readily available, the gunners think nothing of pouring several hundred rounds of expensive 105mm shells into a position held only by one enemy armed with a rifle. But it's not all outgoing. Every day, Snapper gets shelled by the enemy from Laos. Because of their maneuverability, the 1st Air Cavalry are the best equipped to take on this job of dispersing the enemy main forces and breaking them up into smaller units. But even the 1st Air Cav have a limitation. And that limitation is the mountain just behind me there, about 5 kilometers away. That's the border with Laos. And once the NVA take refuge behind there, strictly technically and legally, the 1st Air Cav can't send in ground patrols
or they can't bombard the place. So once the enemy have made that mountain, they're home and dry.
This is the third shelling attack on Saigon in the past 7 days and the 70th throughout South Vietnam in this present long drawn-out offensive. This shell came in at 5 o'clock this morning, demolished 4 houses, killing 10 people. 14 people are still missing, including 7 children. This house belongs to Mr. Nguyen Van Thieu, a 34-year-old electrical engineer. It was his first home. He owned it and bought it less than 2 months ago. Today, he has lost a son, and his wife lies critically wounded in hospital. Next door took the direct hit. A man and a wife and their 6 children died instantly. This is the propelling end of the 122mm Russian-built rocket that fell here 2 hours ago. It was probably fired less than 3 miles away from the center of Saigon, the firing equipment being brought up the river by sampan. This irregular shelling of Saigon and other centers in South Vietnam in the past 10 days follows no pattern. Sometimes the attacks come during the day, but most times during the night when the firing locations are harder to spot. No one is prepared to guess why the Viet Cong are shelling in this way. It can't be to impress the negotiators in Paris. It would surely take a more spectacular show of force to do that. What it could be is the communists' way of saying to the South Vietnamese, despite 500,000 American troops, despite the massive build-up of American arms and air strength, you are not safe. We can shell you when we like and where we like. And having been close to these shellings in the past week, I can vouch that it's very effective propaganda. American military intelligence still insists that the communists do not mean to launch another offensive on Saigon. They say it would stretch the communist line of communication impossibly and might tempt President Nixon to renew the bombing attacks in the north. But the same military intelligence admits that there are within 40 miles of Saigon 4 well-equipped, heavily armed North Vietnamese army units, totaling between 40 and 50,000 men. That fact and these shellings must mean another offensive is near. The question is, where will it come and when? This is Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon.
Spotter 3-6, this is Alpha 3-6, roger. From our present location, we've found another possible pickup zone, over.
Patrols like these in the Mekong Delta are convinced that they're winning their war against the VC. They put as evidence of their success, the number of VC dead and the number of VC defectors. But they have, nevertheless, the substantial backing of thousands of well-armed and well-trained troops, plus barrack ships, helicopters and gunships, and the River Marine Force, to contain and destroy what amounts to scattered handfuls of Viet Cong in these parts. In Saigon, the traditional white dress of mourners has now become a familiar daily sight. Just over a week ago, the American Secretary of State, William Rogers, said from Washington, "The indiscriminate shelling of Saigon will not succeed in putting any extra pressure on us in the Paris negotiations. These attacks are a reminder of the callous attitude with which the enemy regards the innocence of the Vietnam War." Today, despite all subsequent warnings, the shellings go on and the innocents continue to die. These are the Ong Du Tre Con, the Vietnamese for pipe children who live in the discarded sewage pipes in the Saigon suburb of Cholon. They once lived near Ben Hoa, but their homes and entire village has been destroyed. On the 3rd of March, a communist 122mm rocket fell within 10 yards of a children's hospital in Saigon. And that same morning, school children played football with a metal casing they'd found in their playground. It was a Viet Cong mine. It exploded, and this child lost a leg. 13 other children were severely wounded, and they were brought to this children's hospital in Saigon, staffed by a British pediatric team of doctors and nurses, sponsored by the British government.
He was involved in warlike activities about 30 kilometers from Saigon, was brought in here with bullet wounds of the abdominal cavity. He's had injuries to the bowel, injuries to the bladder, and this girl has been in for about a month. She comes from a village on the main road down to the Delta, and she stepped on a mine, has lost one leg. The other was wounded, but she's going to keep it.
These stories are by no means unique, and they cannot expect to compete for international attention with the high military death toll on the battlefields. But they are nevertheless part of this war, a war increasingly being directed against civilians in and around the towns and cities of South Vietnam. This is Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon. Some humorist in the American High Command had codenamed it Twinkletoes, a search and destroy operation in the jungle bordering the Lang Vei River, 40 miles north of Saigon. The noise of the tanks aside, the communists were already aware that the Americans knew of their base camps here. For the past 3 nights, B-52 bombers flying in from Okinawa had made 9 saturation bombing runs over the 25 square mile area. The blast could be heard in Saigon. On Friday, the 14th of March, the morning after the last bombs had dropped, 3 companies of M48 tanks, 36 armored troop carriers, 300 infantrymen, flamethrower units, all from the 11th Armored Cavalry, moved off in 3 separate columns, coded Mike, Hotel, and Delta. Colonel George Patton, son of World War II General Patton, controlled the operation 100 feet up, directing his tank commanders from a spotter helicopter to areas where communists had been sighted. 4 Cobra helicopter gunships armed with rockets accompanied him. o'clock that afternoon, as it began to rain slightly, some North Vietnamese had been seen running to a bunker 3 miles west of us.
Don't forget there were goats in there.
Delta Company was the nearest, and Colonel Patton gave the order to search and destroy. Sometime later, the tanks we were with were ordered to move in as a backup force. 16 communists, including 3 young women identified as North Vietnamese soldiers, were dead. Although they had survived the B-52 bombings, the craters 15 feet deep were only 10 yards away from them. They had attempted to fight their way out of the bunkers and through the tank cordon with rifles.
Set up right in this area, knowing that there were at least 2 people in this particular bunker.
Yeah.
And we tried to get them to come out using our interpreters and got no reaction. Thought they might have been dead because we had thrown grenades and stuff in there. Finally had an American trooper go in and was shot. As a matter of fact, I heard this morning that he did die trying to get them out. We then started throwing in high explosive grenades and this sort of thing. Again, thinking we had them dead, started to dig them out, and about 10 o'clock last night, 2 of them came out throwing grenades and firing weapons. And of course,
all that?
After any human being you'd think had been killed, but the bunker was deeper and had more levels to it than we thought.
The documents taken from the bodies established them as a small reconnaissance company. They'd been relaying information of American troop movements back to their headquarters of the main force division, camped close to the Cambodian border, 35 miles away. They'd lived on rice, lemons, and tinned fish.
Oh, wow, fish.
This document came from the body of a 20-year-old corporal, recently promoted, it read, after 5 years' service in the North Vietnamese Army. Another document we were not allowed to film gave detailed and we were told quite accurate locations of American military installations. This was the first, and as it turned out, the only contact with the North Vietnamese in the entire 3 days and 2 nights of the operation. This was perhaps not surprising. From the outset, it was doubtful whether such a large, slow, and unwieldy armored convoy in this kind of jungle could accomplish much more than a routine clearing up, blowing the few bunkers left untouched by the bombers. And with the one exception, the communists had evacuated every bunker long before the tanks arrived. This is Mike Nicholson, News at 10, Sang Bay River, South Vietnam. The problem now is to give sufficient numbers of the South Vietnamese enough time and experience for them to operate effectively on their own. Time for the Americans to teach them the more advanced techniques of war. By the end of this year, the South Vietnamese will have around 1 million men in their armed forces, both regular and volunteer. And the current theory is that they should be able to take over some of the more vital combat roles from the Americans in a matter of months. In the battle areas, they are becoming more successful, though this might be due to other factors, namely that the communists are certainly weaker now than they've ever been. And the nightly saturation bombings by American B-52 bombers depletes the communist ranks long before they get to the South Vietnamese-held areas. Without question, the South Vietnamese are better equipped now, supplied with the same arms as the American forces. A Vietnamese officer commands men entirely trained, armed, fed and clothed by Americans, and is advised by a full-time American of equal rank. It has already been described as a condition of total dependence. The handover to the South Vietnamese of American arms and specialized equipment is substantial, if not well advertised. The Air Force now has 36 pilots trained in the United States to fly the first jet fighter squadron of American F-5s. Their present missions are confined to communist ground positions around Saigon. But soon they take delivery of the newer A-37 jets, which will give them the range to fly north as far as Hanoi.
In February, the South Vietnamese Navy were given 25 river patrol boats, 10 gunships, and 12 landing craft for river marine patrols in the Mekong Delta. Total cost to the Americans was around $16 million. This is Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon.
Coochie dust off 163, Fox Point check.
63, this is Coochie, roger, mission follows. Coordinates, X-ray Tango, 576265, urgent.
Coochie dust off, this is dust off 163, I have a good copy. We'll be leaving Coochie at this time for the mission. 1-4 Golf, this is dust off 163. I'd like your tactical situation and route of approach in your area, please. We're over your area at this time.
Been receiving contact to our east, over.
Roger, understand. The contact is to the village to the east. Okay, we'll be coming in from the west behind your tracks. Okay, going down.
Okay, good buddy. What's your last name?
Asbroth.
Spell it.
A-S-B-R-O-T-H.
First name?
Stephen. S-T-E-V.
Rank?
Sergeant.